Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Megan Pineda. I'm the Adult Education Specialist with Texas Wildlife Association. Joining us today for Wild at Work is Erika Blecha. Erika is an archaeologist for the Center of Big Bend Studies at Sull Ross State University. Erika has been an archaeologist with the Center of Big Bend Studies for almost 10 years, or 10 years now, since 2016. She holds a master's degree in archaeology from the University of Montana and a bachelor's in anthropology from the University of California at Berkeley. She is currently a PhD candidate with honors at the University of Kansas. Her research focuses on past human environment and human animal relationships through the analysis of zooarchaeological remains. She is specifically interested in how people hunted, processed, and consumed animals and what this reveals about past environments and human behavior. She's also very interested in how the use of space and rock shelters and caves changes over time. Before we let Erica begin, I'd like to remind everybody here today with us to keep yourself muted as we go through the webinar. If you have a question, please answer it in the chat. We will get to any questions at the end of the presentation. Erica, I'm going to go ahead and let you screen share and we can begin.
Okay. All right. Can you see it?
Yes,
I
ma'am. We've
can't
got
see anyone's faces. Megan? Okay, cool.
yes.
All right. Well, thank you. Okay, thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited. I feel like this is a good audience to talk about my research because I do deal with understanding past human animal relationships by looking at animal remains at archaeological sites. So that's what I'm going to be talking to you about today. I'm going to talk to you about some of our collaborative research that we have at a rock shelter out here in far west Texas, and what we've been finding, and then what I'm trying to understand through analyzing these animal bones. So first, I just want to familiarize you with the Center for Big Bend Studies. I don't know if any of you have really heard about us. We are a research institute tied to Sull Ross State University out here in Alpine, Texas. We're also a nonprofit. We have in-house publications and we have an annual journal that we produce that you'll receive if you become a member of the center. You also get, if you become a member, you get like discounted rates to certain things, especially our annual conference, which we hold on the second weekend in November every year. And what we do is we analyze, we look at, and we research the deep human history of the Big Bend region. So recent history to deep, deep, deep indigenous history of this region, and that's really our mission. We have volunteer and research opportunities. We most recently started a master's program in anthropology that started this year. And we have a bachelor's that's in anthropology that's going to be available starting this next fall semester. And we have research support for those students to study the deep human history of this region. So I was telling Megan before we talked, what makes the Trans-Pecos and the Big Bend region so fascinating for archaeological research? What brought me, a person from California, out to rural West Texas? Why did I decide that that was a good idea? Well, the archaeology out here is amazing. It just is absolutely spectacular. That's because it preserves, this region preserves the archaeological record that is often not seen. The reason why this region does that is twofold. It's very arid. We don't get a lot of precipitation, and it's not very humid. And so that allows for organic materials to degrade more slowly. Geologically, we're also very karsty, so we have a lot of caves and rock shelters that further allows protection of these organic materials, and people like to live in rock shelters and caves because it was cooler. So if these artifacts were kept out of the moisture, they just don't degrade as fast or at all compared to other things. So what archaeologists normally study, what our bread and butter is, are chip stone tools. So stone preserves in any context, really. And people were chipping stones since time immemorial. So most archaeologists really focus on the stone tool materials. Other things that preserve in the archaeological record are organic materials that were charred. So charcoal, burned bones, all the organic components were taken out of them. And so they just preserve better and for a longer period of time. Large mammals, so extinct megafauna, is going to preserve for a long period of time because the bones are massive. And so they just can't break down as quickly because they're, a mammoth femur is basically the size of my torso. And then ceramics are also another thing that archaeologists really focus on, especially in kind of the more recent part of human history. I'm talking about North America. Ceramic has been around in other parts of the world for a very long time. So this is really our bread and butter. But what we're missing are these organic materials that are hafted onto the stone tools, the decorations, the ornaments that people wore, the cordage that people used every day, the plant materials that people ate that didn't necessarily char, the smaller mammals that weren't burned. We're just missing, it's estimated, about 80% of the archaeological record by just studying these things that are preserved in the archaeological record. And that's no fault of our own, but this region just allows us to study a part of the archaeological record that is not often seen, unless you have these kind of perfect kind of climates to preserve it. So I'm going to talk about San Esteban Rock Shelter. This is a very large rock shelter in Presidio County. It overlooks the Marfa Plains. The Chihuahuan Trail ran right in front of it, and basically where this railroad is today, that was not there thousands of years ago. That was put in there in the 1930s about. And so it currently blocks the view from the rock shelter out into the plains. It's also been kind of bulldozed out in front of it. So that's kind of one of my questions, is what did this place look like when people were occupying it? But what makes it pretty special and what has been researched in this rock shelter before is the rock art. These are cattle. It looks like indigenous biographic rock art that was depicted in the rock shelter from observing people running cattle along the Chihuahuan Trail. So these are cattle. There's a trail marker, there's a dog, and there's some people running the cattle. So there's some interesting rock art in here as well. I know people just love to see rock art, so I wanted to show that. But the Center for Big Bend Studies has been partnered with the University of Kansas since 2019. The University of Kansas has an endowment called Odyssey Archaeological Research Fund that has money specifically to go after looking for evidence of first people in North America, people that lived at the last ice age. So they lived during the Pleistocene, last ice age. So when I'm talking about the Pleistocene, I'm talking about the very end of it. So the Pleistocene began about 2.8 million years ago and lasted till about 11,700 years ago. I'm talking about the very last few thousand years here, when the ice sheets began to recede from the top of from northern United States. The megafauna started becoming extinct at the end of the Pleistocene. So it looked very differently from what it did today, because it was a lot cooler, a lot more moist, and things like that. So that's something to just kind of put in the back of your mind when I'm talking further. What do we know about first people? Well, this is all kind of what we know about people that use the Clovis technology. For a long time, we, really thought, and some people still think, that the first people came to mainland United States, about what is today mainland United States, about a little over 13,000 years ago. They had these amazing stone tools that are really diagnostic of this technology. They're beautifully flaked. They have this flute that goes up the base. You can, you know exactly when you see it, no one else made it at the time. They had ossus rods that they used to throw these things with, made from ivory from megafauna. And they had distinct blade cores that they used to make these tools. They were chasing after the last of the megafauna, so they were really mobile. They weren't really in any one area for any length of time. They were opportunistic about eating plants, so they didn't. If it took a long time to render a plant edible, they didn't mess with it. They would just eat kind of fruits or things that didn't need to be processed. And they did not use rock shelters. So these are all things that archaeologists have come to like believe that this is the use. It doesn't is the use of first people. It's not necessarily mean that they didn't use rock shelters or they didn't process food. We're learning a lot as we keep excavating. But these are kind of the ideas of what we picture about the first people that came to North and South America. This has really changed in the last 10 to 15 years or so because archaeologists have been finding sites that date to 15, 16, 17,000 years. And it's really pushing back this idea of first people were here about 13,000 years ago. And most recently, evidence came out from White Sands, New Mexico. There's evidence of footprints interbedded, layered with mammoth footprints and human footprints that are along the lake there that date to very consistently 23,000 to 21,000 years ago. So this is really blowing up kind of our idea of archaeologists' idea of how we think people got here, what it looked like when people first got here, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the things that really bothers archaeologists is there's no evidence of cultural material at this footprint site specifically. So we study what people left behind. And we can't really do that at this site. We have footprints, which is amazing. The archaeologists that are working on this site have been able to tell like when kids are picked up by a parent and the weight distribution and all of that, which is fascinating. But we want to know that if we're digging and we come to a certain artifact that tells us that we are in this such and such time, and we do not have that for what we're calling pre-Clovis or first people. So that kind of catches you up on what we're thinking about for first people in North America in general. So the reason why we decided to look for evidence of first people at San Esteban Rock Shelter, there's a multitude of reasons. So one is that it had been previously dug by amateur archaeologists and private people, and so we could see how deep the sediments were. The sediments were, the deeper the sediments are, the more time has been preserved in the archaeological record. So you have a better chance of finding evidence of earlier occupations. If it's only about 6 inches thick, you know that you're not going to find a lot of time in there. But if it's 6 feet deep, you might find layers and layers of human occupation, and they might go back to evidence of first people. The second reason is there was a Folsom preform. So a Folsom is diagnostic of a technology that people use to go after the loss of the megafauna as well as bison. And they lived, the people that use this technology lived a little over 12,000, a little under 13,000 years ago. And the fact that it's a preform means that someone was making that projectile point. They weren't done with it. And so that tells us that they are likely camping there versus they lost the projectile point when they were shooting, chasing after a buffalo or a bison or something like that. So that tells us that people at least 12, 13,000 years ago might have been using this rock shelter, or at least knew about it. The third reason is there's water. So the Alameda Creek runs in front of it. It's about a quarter mile away from it today. There's a spring-fed tinaja in front of it, which I'll show you a photo of that or a map of that shortly. So there was a water source, a perennial water source there. And then the fourth and final reason is the landowners were amenable to letting us work here. So this is on private land. It's also a Texas state archaeological landmark, or antiquities landmark. And so we have to get permission from the state as well as permission from the landowners in order to excavate at this site. And the landowners were willing to let us do that. So this is a LiDAR map. You're looking down at the site, bird's eye view. The darker kind of gray is underneath the shelter of the rock shelter. This on the lower left, that kind of straight line is the tunnel that goes through the railroad in order to get to the site. So our plan was, we knew it had been dug unprofessionally before, and so we were hoping that we could just go deeper than anyone had gone before to find evidence of first people. So we began testing the rock shelter to see what was the deposition, how deep the sediments went, and where were intact deposits, if we can find any evidence of early human occupation. And what we found is that it was more intact than we had discovered, and so we began focusing on certain areas of the rock shelter that were more promising. And one of the areas, and the area I'm going to focus on, is the sandal shaft in the lower right corner. So this shaft is underneath a ton of roof fall. So that's the thing with rock shelters. They're constantly crumbling and falling apart and changing. And so when you're digging them, you have to go around a lot of big, large boulders. But this is the sandal shaft. So we actually discovered it when one of our smaller crew members was on top of the boulders, actually, and found a little crevice and wormed his way through and found intact sediment that didn't look like it had been disturbed. This main hole that you can see straight directly in front of it, we knew had been dug out, and it actually didn't connect. So these holes didn't connect until we were excavated most of the sandal shaft. So how we got into the sandal shaft for a long time was crawling through that hole on the upper left. And when you crawled in, you got to this sediment. We didn't know how deep it was. The roof fall was about a couple feet above you, so it was really cramped. And so we began just testing it to see, is there evidence of human occupation back there? How deep are the sediments? And what we learned is it's very deep. So you can see on the right, that person is about 6 feet tall, and they're standing, and we didn't find the bottom down there. So this is representing about 18,000 years of time from the bottom of his feet to the top. So we were very excited about that. And there's evidence of human occupation in there. So what we do as archaeologists is we look at the sediment packages, and we kind of delineate them by, different groupings, basically, different layers. And the uppermost layer is a modern pack rat midden, and I'll explain what that is. And the middle section is the Holocene, so what we're in today. So it represents from about 10,000 years ago to about 4,000 years ago. The pack rat midden has everything from 4,000 years ago to present, but nothing's really intact in there. And then the bottom green part is the Pleistocene. So the sediments and things in there are dated to about 10,000 to about over 18,000 years old. And what we see within those sediment packages, within those different layers, are at least 3 different human site uses of this locality. So we have a middle archaic at the top, which is about 4,000 years old. And then we have this early archaic occupation, represents about 7 to 6,500 years ago. And then the paleo occupation below is about 16 to 11,000 years ago. And I'm going to walk you through what we found in each of those layers. So the middle archaic, the 4,000-year-old assemblage, is not very robust. It's right below that pack rat midden, so those little rodents probably ate into some of that. But it's represented by a grass bedding that we believe people were lying down to kind of keep the dust down and kind of make it more amenable to be back there. And then within that grass was a wooden foreshaft that was hafted, and contracting stem projectile point. That is diagnostic. We know based on the shape of that and how it's been dated before that it dates to right in that middle archaic kind of 4,000-year-old period. We don't have a date on the foreshaft yet. We did just submit it, so hopefully it all ties in together. That's the idea. But when you work in rock shelters, a lot of things move around, which I'll get into a little bit later too. So the early archaic age assemblage is spectacular. It has been featured on the New York Times. I don't know if you read about it, but it has a lot of pieces and parts of weapons. It has atlatl throwing system pieces and parts, basically every component. It has a throwing stick or a boomerang, straight flying boomerang, which is used to kill rabbits mainly. Some people call it a rabbit stick, but they also used it to attack each other. So that when I'm talking about the atlatl, in case some of y'all are not familiar with it, it's a composite weapon system. The atlatl is the throwing stick, the one that this gentleman has with the stones attached to it. So we have a piece of that in this assemblage that dates to about 7,000 years ago. It's on the very bottom. It was snapped in half. And then we have all the pieces and components of the dart itself. So the very tip is the foreshaft, and hafted to it with sinew, or sometimes cordage, some kind of mastic usually too, is the stone point. And so this foreshaft will lock into the actual wooden shaft itself. So you could take it out and interchange your weapons. And then you have the main dart shaft, and then the fletching at the end is where the feathers would have been placed. And we have the fletching as well. We also have what is called self-tipped darts. So it's the one that's just right below this photo with the pointy tip. So that's a foreshaft that was never hafted to a stone point. That is the point. And we believe there was probably some kind of poison on the tip of that we are looking into figuring out what kind of poison that was. But there's not very many of those around, so that's a very fascinating artifact as well. But if you read the article, what's not really mentioned in it is that there's other things besides the weapons. So we have plated mats, we have a bone awl with like a gunk on it. You can see people's fingerprints on it. It has gunk on the kind of end of, it's a metapodial of either a deer or pronghorn, and it has little designs on it as well. We have combustion features, so they're starting some kind of small fire. We have a ton of grass matting as well. There's what we think are human coprolites. We need to double check that, but they look pretty much like human coprolites. We have an olivella shell bead bracelet. So that's fascinating to me. Those shells are either from the Gulf of Mexico or the Gulf of California or the Pacific coast. So we know that people were either going to those places or interacting with people from those places and trading them. 6,000 years ago. That's absolutely amazing. We really don't start seeing that in our part of the world in the Big Bend region until the Puebloan cultures show up and population really increases. So that's a really interesting part of this story of this occupation. And then we have a pronghorn hide in the lower right. This is almost 7,000-year-old pronghorn hide, prepared. You can see the little cuts in the corner where it's stretched out and dried. And then this rock is a metate that's overturned, and on the other side is black pigment. So we know that there is something going on back here, maybe beyond just the deposition or retooling of weapons, but that's kind of something that we're really interested in sorting out. So when it comes to the paleo occupation, you'll notice that there is a wide date range there. So we have about 15,500 to about 11,000 years represented in these large combustion features. So you can see ash and charcoal on the bottom. There's a bunch of burned rocks. So these are huge contained features that they were probably cooking something back there. It probably didn't have a top on it at that time, otherwise they would have smoked each other out. So the top of the rock shelter was probably way more open, and this is likely more of the front of the rock shelter. And um, it has no artifacts in it. So really all that's we're finding in these are burned animal bones. We know from doing micromorphology and kind of looking at how these features were made, they were made one on top of the other. So these are not just two features, these are probably 4 to 5 features. And they're contained, so it's probably not a wildfire that just came in. They have boundaries to them, which is indicative of human use. So the reason we think there are a couple reasons why we could be getting this large range of this large range of dates. One could be they were simply using these features for 5,000 years in the same locality, and there just wasn't a lot of sediment blowing in to kind of create any distinction between them. Another theory is that they were burning on top of pack rat middens. If you're not familiar with pack rats, they're amazing creatures that build their nests in rock shelters, crevices, caves in arid North America, but they're also found other parts of the world. And they collect mainly botanicals, but really anything, bones as well, from about 100 yards within their within their area. And they will use the same nest for tens of thousands of years. So you can date some pack rat middens that you find on the surface, and they could have plants in them that date to 40,000 years ago. So they're pretty incredible. They do this to regulate their body temperature, and humans like them in the past because it was free kindling. It was, already dried plant material that they could easily start burning. So if I decided to go to a rock shelter today and took a piece of a pack rat midden and started a fire in a rock shelter, an archaeologist came the next day and wanted to see when that fire was made, they might get a 15,000-year-old date or older, and it would look like I made that fire 15,000 years ago, when in reality I used, old plant material to start my fire. So that's just one of the things we kind of have to parse. But we do know that these features are lower than the 7,000-year-old occupation. So they are, older than that weapon kit at the very least. And we believe that the reason why we're not finding a lot of artifacts is like maybe humans were using rock shelters, and it's more than possible humans were using rock shelters during the Pleistocene way differently than people were using rock shelters in the Holocene. And maybe they're more living out in front of them rather than kind of deep inside of them. So it's just something that we're kind of working on. So I'm interested in how this place, the sandal shaft, has changed through time, how it was used through time, and how that influenced human behavior. I'm also really interested in how the rock shelter and the surrounding, what did it look like through time? Like what brought people here? We know obviously there was no railroad in front of it, and it wasn't bulldozed. So what did it look like? And one way I want to use what I want to use to answer that question, there's many ways to answer that question, is through the proxy of animal bones. So animal bones, animals can be really diagnostic of the types of environments they lived in, especially small mammals, because they're more sensitive to climatic and weather changes and things like that, and they're going to respond more rapidly to that. So I'm looking at kind of like the species and of animals that we have in the cave and how they change through time. Animal bones can tell us about what people were hunting, though, how they were hunting, how they were processing their food, what parts of animals were people, coveting, were they using them for fur, et cetera, et cetera. So really animals are a big part of the past human history. So what do we know about the broad regional paleo environment of the Big Bend? And we do know a lot actually, just of like the general changes through time, and that's because biologists, when radiocarbon dating, when we got this technology in the 60s to directly date organic materials, um, biologists sort of went crazy and they started targeting pack rat middens and identifying plant species. Plants are diagnostic and indicative of certain climatic changes as well as animals, and so they could directly date them. And they developed this kind of pattern of the change in the environment through time. So during the end of the Pleistocene, we know that there was both summer and winter rainfall. There's much cooler summers, and the pinyon, juniper, oak woodlands were much lower in elevation, and they were intermixed with succulents, kind of something we don't see today. And then about 10,000 years ago, when we transitioned to the Holocene, winter rainfall started to decrease and the summer temperature increased. So the pinyon, juniper, oak woodlands started retreating to higher elevations. About 6,000 years ago, 8,000 years ago, we get monsoonal rainfalls, and that increases the subtropical shrubs and the succulents and the grasses, but the winters are still relatively harsh. And the Chowan Desert in the Big Bend region became what it is today, basically about 4,000 years ago. The climate stabilized. We have summer monsoons, reduced winter freezes, is more variable droughts. And so the shrublands and succulents began to take over the grasslands, and the pinyon, oak, juniper woodlands had retreated to our Sky Islands. So our really tall mountains that we have out here in the Chisos Mountains, in the Big Bend National Park, in the Guadalupe Mountains on the border of New Mexico and Texas, and the Livermore, the Davis Mountains, kind of in the central part of our region. That's one of the things, though, about our region is it's very heterogeneous. So we have really tall mountains, we have deep elevational changes, we have lower elevations along the Rio Grande. We have high plains, and so people and animals would have taken advantage of that because you didn't have to go very far to get into a different kind of microclimate. And so what we want to do is start focusing on certain points in the landscape where we know people were, and how does that environment compare to the broader paleo environmental record, and does it differ or change, and does that tell us about why people were there? Another question that I have is what animals were in the Big Bend in the last 12,000 years? So we know a lot about what was here during the Pleistocene and at the end of the Pleistocene, but when it comes to what was here during all of the Holocene, we really have no idea. Our region is very archaeologically understudied. There's a lot of questions that we have still, and the reason why this is so important is because we have to know what animals were around in order to know what people were targeting to hunt, how they were interacting with them, what did they favor, you know, what was around, how does it all change? So we really have no idea, and we're starting from ground zero to just get a representative sample of what was available to humans for the period of record that we have at San Esteban Rock Shelter. So a good example is bison, our bison. They weren't in this they're documented here during the Pleistocene. They're found in rock shelters and caves. But for the last 10,000 years, we really have no evidence of them in the Big Bend. And that's important because there's suspicion that they were here during the Holocene, but we have never found them anywhere archaeologically. There's a historic account of someone seeing them in Terralingua in the 1800s, but it's not very well, we don't have any evidence to back it up, basically. And humans love bison. They use their hides for robes for the cold. They use their hides for shelter. They're fatty, and fat's important, especially in a desert environment. You need that. in order to survive. Otherwise, you'll get sick from just eating protein. So these animals are very coveted in North American history, and so if they are here, that would be pretty significant. But as of right now, we don't have any evidence of them here beyond about 10,000 years ago. So what I did is I analyzed about 4,600 pieces of bone from the sandal shaft. I was able to identify them to about 100 different species. So this is not exhaustive of what I was able to find, but it is representative of what was in the sandal shaft. We have extinct fauna, so we have horses, and we have three different kinds of pronghorn. We have a lot of the Caprimyrix, which is a pygmy pronghorn. And then we have a few saber-toothed cat jaws, and we have some direwolf bones as well. And we can actually sex the direwolf because we have the baculum. So we know at least a male was in the rock shelter at some point in time. So that's really common in rock shelters. And what makes them messy is humans were sharing them with other animals. And both humans and animals can kind of mess up like the layers of the human occupation. But yeah, this is just an exciting aside. What really tells us about the environment, though, are the extirpated species. So these are species that were in the region or are around the region, but are no longer where the site is, essentially. So they're outside of like a 20-mile radius of the site currently. And that is, potentially because of a change in environment and a change in temperature and things like that. So they can tell us a lot about what the site looked like through time. So if we take the muskrat, for example, which is a semi-aquatic rodent that's found in wetlands that like slower moving water. Today, they're really only found in kind of the El Paso area, the kind of central part of the Rio Grande. They're also found in Balmorhea, but they were pretty much reintroduced. So they're really not found anywhere in the Big Bend anymore. So if we look at the layers that I have here, the gray represented the human occupations. If we look at when we're finding these muskrat bones in comparison to these human occupations, it lines up, right? So we know that the Pleistocene was very wet. So it tracks that we're finding a lot of muskrat bones during that time. Then right at the Holocene Pleistocene transition, when it becomes more arid, we don't see them anymore. And then we see them again during that early Archaic occupation, which signifies to me that maybe moisture came back and water came back and slow moving water came back, and potentially that's why humans were there. But we can't just take one animal, one species as diagnostic of this change because, as I mentioned, rock shelters are messy. Bones can move around, a churning of rodents and carnivores and people. So I wanted to add other species that are attracted to slow moving water, and we're getting the same exact kind of pattern. And actually, we're seeing that similarly across the other occupations as well, in the Middle Archaic occupation as well, that when humans were there, we're starting to see there's more water. So the water's kind of ebbing and flowing through time. And when it is there, people are there, which makes sense. They're taking advantage of the water and then the animals that are attracted to the water as well. So when we compare it to the more arid adapted species, we get an interesting sort of pattern as well. So we don't see any arid adapted species during the Pleistocene, but we begin to see them at the transition from the Pleistocene to the Holocene. We're seeing pallid bats and lesser prairie chickens. And then at that early Archaic occupation, we're seeing a lot of arid adapted fauna. So At the same time there's water, it's also becoming increasingly dry. So that further makes sense why there's more robust early archaic occupation because it's arid, but there's water in front of the rock shelter. So if we think about this early archaic age assemblage and what people were doing there, as I kind of already said, um, what did this place look like when they were people were there 6,500 years ago? Well, we know that the railroad was gone, so we know that for sure. And then we know that because of these muskrats and these other fauna, there there was slow moving water. And most likely the Alameda Creek was much closer to the rock shelter, and there was just pooled water in front of it. It might have looked something like this. This is an AI. My friend did the photo before he edited it, but I asked AI to change it to look like this. So this is an AI replication of what it possibly could have looked like when people were retooling their weapons at San Esteban. So I talked a little bit about bison. We did find bison bone in the sandal shaft. The issue was they were out of context. So they weren't within sediment that we could date to a specific time period. They were on top of some rocks and because it's craggly back there. And this bison bone had evidence of an impact fracture on the this is the thoracic vertebra. So it's basically like the hump of the bison. So that was really interesting to us. People were hunting this, which means they were probably close by to the rock shelter, but we weren't sure what time period. So we know it's an impact fracture. Here at the center, I have a colleague who does experimental archaeology, and he shoots projectile points at animals and other sort of mediums to understand what that would look like in the archaeological record. So it's a pretty good comparison of what this would have looked like. This bison was most likely hit with a stone projectile point in the hump of the bison. So, like I said, we didn't know what it dated to. We recently got the radiocarbon dates back, and it's about 6,000 years old, which is absolutely incredible. They have never been recorded, like I said, in this part of the world at this time, about 6,000 years ago. They are thought to be way up north in the plains, in the higher plains, or way farther south in Mexico, targeting kind of the greener grass and things like that. So the fact that we have bison most likely very close to this rock shelter and close in our region, regardless of the size of herd, is going to attract people and going to attract quite a bit of people through this part of the world. So it really kind of changes the way we're thinking about how people live during this time period. And so it also kind of changes what we think about what the rock shelter looked at this time. It most likely had bison in front of it. These bison are giant compared to the rock shelter, but it might have been a little bit greener, a little bit grassier, but it still would have been had some water going in front of it. So that's the end of my talk. You can reach out to me. My email's in the top left corner. I want to thank all these people. This is a very much a collaborative research effort. And the family that owns this rock shelter is amazing. We're on social media. You can give us a follow. If you know anyone interested in joining the masters or the bachelors here, Sull Ross, send them over to us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Erica. That was incredibly fascinating. You're such a wealth of knowledge. We really appreciate you sharing some of that with us today. Even though I'm sure that's such a small snapshot of what you guys are into out there, but we really appreciate it. We appreciate your time today.
Yeah, of course.
I don't have any questions in the chat, but you've got some great compliments there. So very well done on your presentation today. For all of you listening, and for Erica, you as well, this presentation will be posted to the TWA YouTube page. So within about a week, I'll have it up on that page for anybody to go back and view again, Erica, for you to utilize should you want to or need to. And so I'll work on getting it up over there. One last very quick thing before we all go is I would like to kind of I always try to give a plug to our next Wild at Work. And in March, we will be welcoming Price Rumbelow from the Rio Grande Joint Venture, talking to us about landowner opportunities through their organization, and that'll be on March 25th at noon. Again, if there are no questions, everybody have a great afternoon. Enjoy the rest of your day. Oh, we have one question. Oh, rock art. There was a question about rock art. I'm assuming at the just says that area. Margaret, Amanda, could you elaborate on your question? Any rock art in that area? Which particular
What
area?
is there any rock art in that San Esteban area?
Yes, yeah, the rock shelter has quite a bit of rock art. There's actually an article about it in the Bulletin of Texas, I think the Texas Archaeological Society Bulletin, and there's an article about the rock art in there. But yeah, there's cattle depicted going along the Chihuahuan Trail. There is some historic stuff. We actually have in pencil like a devil that's peeing. And then there's a horse, people riding horses. There's a cross as well that's probably more Spanish. And then we have some kind of enigmatic stuff in red and black along the rock shelter as
But that
well. So there's, yeah.
that's only rock art in the historical era.
Yeah, so the horses and the cattle like definitely make it more historic, and the cross particularly, but the other stuff could be earlier. Unfortunately, we can't date any of it because the person that recorded the rock art in the 60s put a preservative over the top of it, and it made the uh the rock art melt, and then they repainted over it. So sometimes you can take the pigment off of and date it directly, especially if there's an organic binder in them. But unfortunately, we can't do that at this rock shelter. But in the area, we know, or at least we've heard, we haven't had a chance to see it, but there's some great rock art along that kind of bluff face. So.
There was another question about poisonous gases. Good question. In the caves that y'all explore. If-
There's no poisonous gases that I know of, but you can get hantavirus. So we wear masks and things like that so we don't get any spores from animal feces, basically. Or, try to minimize the ingestion of feces and sediments and things like that. So that's definitely a concern. And they're a messy. Excavating rock shelters is very messy. I should have thrown some pictures of how dirty we look after excavating. But yeah, do I have any paranormal experiences? Not at San Esteban. Yeah, not at San Esteban. I think if you talk to enough archaeologists, you've all had weird experiences, but not at San Esteban. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time today, Erica. We greatly
Yeah.
appreciate it. Again, everyone can find this for anybody if you want to share it with friends and family, please do so once we get it posted online. Everybody have a great afternoon. Again, thank you, Erica, and we hope to keep up with your work on social media. And great job.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks.